For workshop, we do have a presentation prepared by our Conservation Advisory Committee. And I understand the DEC as well is a part of this. So we welcome you to and look forward to your sharing with us. So.
Hi. Good evening.
Good
Thank
evening.
you. Is this on? Do I need to? Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't pick up very well, so as best you can, speak directly into the thing. That'd
There's
be
no
great.
light on it. Is that better? Okay.
We can hear
great.
you, and it's more about the machine picking you up for the recorded version of
Okay.
this. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity this evening to present the City of Beacon Natural Resources Inventory. My name is Ingrid Heckel, and I'm a Conservation and Land Use Specialist with the DEC Hudson River Estuary Program. I work through a partnership with Cornell University, and I'm going to be tag teaming this presentation with our partner, Sean Carroll, who's here from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Dutchess County. He's a senior GIS educator. I'm going to jump right ahead into this. Just a little quick background about the Estuary Program. We're a unique non-regulatory program at DEC established to help people enjoy, protect, and revitalize the Hudson River and its valley. And we work in the 10 counties bordering the tidal Hudson to achieve these key benefits. And within the program, our conservation and land use team works with municipalities to conserve natural areas and habitat through local land use planning and decision making. And we've been doing this sort of assistance and education work for over 20 years, and this is the basic planning framework we encourage communities to follow, beginning with identifying and understanding what you have, what your resources are, to provide a foundation for setting local conservation priorities and developing plans and policies to protect and manage those resources for the future. And so several years ago, recognizing that many communities lacked a basic foundation of a natural resources inventory, we developed this guidance document about how to develop one. There's a lot of new information available at a state and regional level that we wanted communities to be aware of and use in their municipal planning. And in the 7 years since then, we've worked with over 30 communities in our watershed to develop inventories, and subsequently worked with communities going further into open space planning and conservation planning, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. So a natural resources inventory is basically a compilation of information, including maps and descriptions, a narrative report about geology and soils, water resources, including drinking water, streams, watersheds, important habitats, wildlife records, information about land use, and more recently, including information about climate change, current climate conditions, and future projections, how communities may be affected. And some communities also choose to document their cultural resources, things like historic sites, recreation areas, and scenic resources in the context of these projects. So the scope is really up to the community to decide, and these projects they vary from place to place. The Beacon NRI goals were to create an education tool for local residents, as well as project sponsors coming to the city about the city's resources, and to create a unified reference for planning, designing, and reviewing new development, as well as a foundation for future land use policy, including comprehensive planning and zoning, as well as climate adaptation planning and open space planning. And the hope of the Conservation Advisory Council was that this project would also help to cultivate environmental stewardship of local resources. And so the project came about through a partnership that we established with Cooperative Extension in Dutchess County to provide municipal assistance with creating NRIs. At the time, we were seeking ways to raise the capacity of other county and regional partners to provide this assistance, and we provided some funding that they used to provide the mapping support and facilitate meetings with the Conservation Advisory Council, who applied through a competitive process to receive this assistance. They were awarded it in 2017, and so the project kicked off at that time. And I'm going to hand it over to Sean. I wasn't directly involved in the NRI planning process. My colleague Laura Heedy was, and she provided a lot of support and information about biological resources in Beacon in the context of the project. But Sean was very involved, and so he's going to take it forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ingrid, and thank you for having us. So again, my name is Sean Carroll. I work with Cornell Cooperative Extension up in Millbrook. As Ingrid mentioned, I assisted in this project mostly with the creation of maps, but also with some of the facilitation. And so the process, as Ingrid mentioned, started in 2017. We began meeting in earnest with the CAC. Brian DeFeo was the head of the CAC at that time, or the chair. And we were meeting nearly monthly at the Beacon Institute, just on Main Street there, who graciously hosted us there often. And the process was really involving the CAC, but we also involved John Clark was part of that process as well, providing a lot of valuable input. And we met in earnest in 2017, but the project really kind of wrapped up in 2018, a year later. So the output of that was, I have a copy here I can pass around, was a 21 maps and nearly 30-page report that came about, of which there's, I believe, 9 chapters. 7 of those chapters are kind of content-specific, ranging from geology, soils, biodiversity, scenic cultural resources, et cetera. But also at the end of the report, there are 2 chapters dedicated to considerations for decision making, and then a chapter for next steps, what to do with this tool afterwards. And of course, we were cognizant of including and integrating the comprehensive plan as well as LWRP and state and county resources into it. So I just want to give you a quick overview at what some of the maps are that are included, and I'll just pass this around. Let's take a look at it. So as I mentioned, there's about 7 content-specific chapters, again, ranging from a geology section in which we mapped bedrock, surficial geology, topography, and talked about some of the planning implications pertaining to that. Steep slopes, I know the city recently developed a steep slopes ordinance, and also, some planning implications pertaining to the soils and topography and geology as well. There's a pretty significant water resources section, overviewing streams, water bodies, watersheds, wetlands, water quality, water supply, and flood areas. Some obvious planning implications for this, maintaining wetlands and riparian buffers, as well as, of course, the city's drinking water supply. We also had a flood hazard areas map. Of course, conserving and revegetating and reconnecting floodplains, important from a water quality as well as a biodiversity standpoint, but also from a human safety impact, making sure that we're mapping and understanding where our floodplains are and not developing in them. There's several maps and a very significant chapter on biodiversity and habitats within the city. Some of the maps included in that were a wildlife habitat index, forest and street trees, significant habitats, coastal and shoreline habitat, and important areas for rare plants and animals. And involved in this, one of the key components of this process for the habitat section of the report was working with Hudsonia on developing a really fine-scale habitat map for the city of Beacon. This was a really iterative process in which the CAC got completely involved, and some of the volunteers and residents as well. So Hudsonia did kind of the base mapping, and we actually went out into the field and kind of QA'd, QC'd, and checked some of these habitats to ensure that they were accurate. So again, developing a new data set for the city that's hopefully very useful. And then just along the lines with that, again, there was a section on forests and street trees as well, making sure that we're looking to preserve large unfragmented forests, having the Fishkill Ridge and the Hudson Highlands right in the backyard, obviously a priority of the city of Beacon, but also bringing it down to our local streets and making sure that street trees and kind of small-scale urban agriculture or urban forestry is included as well. Getting towards the end of it, there's a land cover and green spaces area section. Just wanted to kind of highlight this, but acknowledge that it is kind of an ever-evolving data set. As new areas come into protection, the static map won't change, but it's an opportunity for updates. I'll mention a little bit later a project we're working with the county in which a lot of these protected lands data sets will be updated more regularly. And then lastly, the CAC helped us to map, I should say the CAC along with a lot of town volunteers. I know our city volunteers, I know the city historian was involved in helping to develop cultural resources section, highlighting historical and cultural resources as well as scenic and recreational. And with that, I'll just turn it back over to Ingrid real quick.
Thanks, Sean. So yeah, this was a really high-level overview of the document. Our hope is that you'll take some time to dive into it yourselves. It's very accessible. Each map has a one-page description, succinct, including planning considerations, which Sean showed some examples of on the slides. What the data is, what's being shown, some highlights. We think it's a great training resource itself if you have new planning board members to ask them to read the document, become more familiar with what's present in the city. In the final part of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about some ways the planning board and the city can use the NRI to take some next steps potentially. Having all this great information about your resources is wonderful, but what's the city going to do with it? So planning would be a next step, and this information can obviously inform your next comprehensive plan update. I'm not sure when that's scheduled. Many communities have integrated the NRI into their comprehensive plans. It can form the recommendations there. But some communities also go further to develop open space inventories and plans that really focus on the open space component in further detail. An open space inventory takes the NRI a step further to identify conservation priority areas and parcels that would warrant potential protection. And an open space plan goes a little further than that, then to actually decide, well, what are the best uses and ways to manage those areas and involves more public input and participation in establishing new policy for the city. And that typically might involve looking at potential areas like land acquisition possibly, creation of new parks or preserves, but also land use policy and zoning updates, specific recommendations in those areas, potentially restoration of habitat or other areas, and other opportunities for recreation and trails, and also potentially private land stewardship, ways that private landowners can contribute to protecting the city's resources. So the Conservation Advisory Council is really interested in pursuing an open space plan. Esther Jackson is here. She helped organize this presentation. Thank you, Esther. And her contact is up here if anybody's interested in discussing that further. I'm actually supposed to be presenting to the Common Council about open space planning 2 weeks from now. So to be continued. As a first step towards an open space plan or inventory, in follow-up to completion of the NRI, the CAC really wanted to go further. At that time in 2020, all of the state grant programs were frozen. There weren't really any opportunities for funding, but we had a small amount of funding in our budget that we were able to use to support, again, Sean's time through cooperative extension to assist the CAC with starting an open space survey in the city. And so they conducted this survey in the summer of 2021, last year, and received about 300 responses. There was a written survey asking people about their priorities for conservation and for green spaces in the city and recreation. And then there was also a mapping kind of tool that people could drop pins on to identify locations that they thought were important or potential opportunities for new recreation assets. So that project was summarized. Sean gave a presentation to the Common Council last year, and it's on the website if anybody wants to read it. And it's a good first start, getting the public talking about this topic, and could lead into a wider planning effort. And this is a summary of some of the input they received about the #1 priorities for green and open space protection, and the top priority was conservation of natural areas, followed by walking and bike trails or paths, and updating and maintaining existing open spaces. And back to the NRI, just in terms of the planning board's month-to-month activities, there are ways that this information can be integrated into your SECRA process and site plan reviews in terms of supporting information about resources that may be present, could potentially be affected on project sites. Some communities either recommend or require that applicants use the NRI or refer to information in the NRI in the process of filling out their EAF forms. The city of Poughkeepsie actually adopted a law in 2019 that requires their NRI to be consulted for SECRA reviews, and they were able to do that in part because they got support from Vassar College to put all of their mapping online, and it makes it very easy for applicants to zoom into their parcel and print out a series of maps about resources that are present, and then the law requires them to provide a brief conservation analysis about how resources might be affected and how the project is responding to those issues. So we had a webinar last year where Natalie Quinn, who's the planner for Poughkeepsie, talked about that law and how they're implementing it. It's available, the recording is on our website, and I'd be happy to share that with you. Even, short of a law, there are ways that the NRI information can be incorporated to your project, your site plan review or subdivision review checklists, or used informally by yourselves in reviewing projects. And finally, I'm going to hand it back over to Sean.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, for anyone who's not aware, the county is working on updating their countywide natural resources inventory. I'm assisting the county's Department of Planning and Development on this process. The current NRI for the county is from 2010, so it's a 12-year-old document at this point. And while a lot of that information is still relevant, it's less of a complete overhaul and more of just updating and reformatting. So it currently is, a PDF document that is a great tool, but we really want to kind of bring it into the 21st century and make it more interactive. So kind of what Ingrid was mentioning with a lot of the mapping layers, the real utility of those is the ability to kind of zoom in at the parcel level and see where all these resources are at a fine scale. So that'll be one of the best benefits of this process. Just kind of where we're at with that. We're in the first of 2 years in that process. We began the planning and grant application back in 2021. We received funding from the Hudson River Estuary Program to begin this process. And at the end here of 2022, we're currently drafting new content, some of the new chapters, and then next year we'll be really working with the county's Office of Computer Information Systems, their kind of GIS department, on developing the web application for that. And we'll be doing a ton of outreach and trainings to municipalities on that. And we've also been having municipal and stakeholders input through surveys and committee participation. So as I mentioned, all that content will live on the county's website, and it'll have a really slick application for viewing, analyzing, and downloading data, and it'll be a great companion tool for a lot of these local NRIs, such as the city has. So be sure to keep you all in the loop as that process continues.
Yeah, that's great information. Yeah. To what degree does the city's NRI inform the counties?
Yeah, so we get this question a lot. It's a great question. The county's NRI really, it's a much more landscape scale perspective. Looking at the county as a whole and how a lot of these habitats are interconnected, but it doesn't really drill down at the municipal scale level, like the City of Beacon's NRI does. So it's not going to have all the specifics that your municipal NRI has. Getting down to parcel level protections, or if you do have municipal zoning that's specific to the city, those are kind of things that only would be included in yours.
Yeah. So by reference, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of overlap and back and forth, but it's having the kind of two scales is really valuable.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
So about the project you're discussing is a GIS project for populating parcel information with environmental information, essentially, and that could potentially be used by design professionals to understand, and also property owners potentially, or whatever, a whole group of stakeholders,
right,
to at the beginning of the process where things are being contemplated, important environmental resources will be forefronted in the beginning.
Right.
And one of the ways that a community can encourage that is you're saying that Poughkeepsie in particular has required this to be consulted as part of the initial environmental
Right.
Assessment. And I'm curious, I've used a thing called Oasis in New York City. It's also a GIS thing that's
Okay.
parcel. Basically, you look up an address.
Sure.
And it gives you all, like,
Yeah.
way too much information. And
Yeah.
would this have a kind of interface like that?
Yeah, so I mean, the county already has parcel access. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's a similar tool. Right now, it's kind of really just used for obtaining parcel information, but it also does, at this level, it has, I think, just basic wetlands and floodplains information. But the goal is to really tie these two applications together so that, yes, you can drill down at the parcel level, with the caveat of being it's not survey scale data. I mean, even the parcel boundaries and RPT would agree with that. It's meant to be a starting point, right? So it's a place to get down to the parcel level, explore what resources might be there, and if there are, some fine lines that need more accurate mapping, then, obviously a survey would be necessary. But
That sounds really useful.
yeah,
So the report that you shared is current as of 2020.
correct.
I'm just curious, is this an update of an earlier similar type report, or is this a brand-new initiative?
For the city of there's no previous natural resources inventory for the city, so it's.
Yeah, to some degree, as much as we did on the comprehensive plan, but nowhere near this level of detail, and
Right.
obviously this is more current.
Yes.
Curious, two things, and I don't know who I'm asking this question to, but does the city have plans? I'm sure they have plans for use of this for many specific things, but do you know if they have plans to codify this and make a requirement that applicants use this tool?
Not that I'm aware of. I think we have the ability to use it any time.
Sure.
It's an adopted city document.
Yeah.
So, I don't think the city, at least as far as I know, has mandated any use. But, the chapters are there. It's easy to get to. It's on the website.
Yeah, it's a great tool.
And for any particular parcel that has, that can be identified as having these sorts of critical sensitive areas, it should be looked at.
Yeah.
I know I look at it, and I look at parcel access all the time, the same thing. I think one of the things that would be most interesting is sort of the next step, and this was talked about with the committee at the time, was to use it to identify high-priority parcels. So you take
Yeah.
the top 10 parcels that you would like to protect long-term, and you not only do more detailed work on those parcels, but you also come up with a development scenario for that parcel.
Yeah.
Or options for those parcels, so that it would be, this should be identified for public purchase, or a conservation easement, or a conservation subdivision, or, limited use options, or big buffers, or, that sort of thing. So it's something on the books, so when an applicant comes in, they know how the city feels about it, so you get it 90% right in the first pass rather than 90% wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. When are we due for our next comp plan update?
10 years is usually what they've been doing. That would be
10 years
2027.
from 20 okay. So it's a really great companion piece to our comprehensive plan as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the comprehensive plan is always meant to have sort of add-ons in that 10 period.
Yeah.
You do a transportation plan, or you do a pedestrian plan, or you do a Main Street plan, which the city's working on, or a conservation plan.
Yeah, great. Thank you for your great work. This looks very comprehensive.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
It's probably the first time I've heard a round of applause like that.
Hey, we'll take it.
Good job.